The knock came at 3 in the morning, and the man on the other end of the radio only said one sentence. We lost contact with the bell. 200 feet down, in water black as ink, 3 divers had gone silent, and nobody topside knew if they were alive or already gone. Somewhere below the surface, a logbook sat open on a steel shelf, its pages damp, its last entry unfinished mid-sentence. That logbook would later be called the most honest document ever pulled out of the ocean, because the man who wrote it never expected anyone to read it. Picture this. You are strapped into a suit that weighs more than you do, breathing a mixture of gas that makes your voice sound like a cartoon chipmunk, and every single decision you make in the next 6 hours could be the last one you ever make. That is not a movie plot. That was Tuesday for a man we are calling Sam, a real commercial diver whose actual name has been changed for this story, but whose diary, smuggled out and shared years later by a family member, gives us a window into a world almost nobody outside the industry ever sees. Deep-sea diving is not the colorful reef swimming you picture in a travel brochure. It is dark, cold, crushing work, done by people most of us will never meet, doing jobs most of us could never imagine. Here is why this story matters. Every single day, oil rigs, underwater pipelines, bridges, and ship hulls around the world are inspected and repaired by human beings who go down into pressure that would crush a car like a soda can. And yet almost nothing is written about what actually happens in their heads down there. We hear about astronauts. We hear about Everest climbers. We rarely hear from the man 300 feet under the surface of the Gulf of Mexico, alone with his thoughts and the sound of his own breathing amplified inside a metal helmet. That silence is exactly why this diary matters so much. It is not a polished memoir written for an audience. It is scraps of truth, written in pencil, sometimes shaking, sometimes calm, always honest. If a story like this is already giving you chills, stick around, because what this diver wrote about the ocean floor is stranger and heavier than anything you would expect. And if you want more true stories that pull back the curtain on lives most people never see, hit subscribe right now, because Shadowlight Stories has a lot more where this came from. Let's talk about who these people actually are, because the job itself sounds almost unbelievable once you understand it. Commercial saturation divers, the kind who go past 150 feet, do not simply hold their breath and swim down like a movie hero. They live inside pressurized chambers on support ships for weeks at a time, breathing a mix of helium and oxygen so their bodies can survive pressure that would otherwise turn nitrogen in their blood into deadly bubbles. Think about that for a second. These men do not go home at night. They eat, sleep, and exist inside a metal tube the size of a small camper van, pressurized to match the depth of the ocean floor they are working on, sometimes for a month straight, only leaving that chamber through a sealed diving bell that drops them straight down into the black water and pulls them straight back up. It is one of the strangest, most isolating jobs on the planet, and almost nobody talks about what it does to a person's mind. Sam started this life the way a lot of divers do. Broke, restless, and looking for a paycheck bigger than anything back home could offer. His first entries in the diary are almost cheerful. He writes about the money, about sending checks back to his mother, about the strange thrill of dropping through layers of blue that slowly turn to black. But by the 3rd week, something shifts in the handwriting. The sentences get shorter. The observations get stranger. He starts writing about sounds. Not imaginary sounds, real ones. The kind that echo through deep water in ways scientists still do not fully understand. Groaning metal, distant pings. What he describes as, in his own words, something that sounds almost like breathing, but bigger than any animal breathing he had ever heard. Now here is the part that most people do not know, and honestly, it is the reason this story stuck with me long after I first read about it. The deep ocean is not silent. Sound travels almost 5 times faster underwater than it does through air, which means a noise made 100 miles away can reach a diver's ears clear as day. Ships, whales, shifting tectonic plates, all of it turns into an eerie soundscape that most of us will never hear, because we will never be down there long enough to notice it. Sam's diary describes nights, or what felt like nights, inside a windowless chamber, where the pressure hull would groan and pop from the temperature difference, and he swore he could hear something moving just outside the range of the ship's lights. He was not a superstitious man. He was an engineer's son, trained to trust data over fear. But even trained men start to question themselves when the ocean starts talking back. This is where the emotional weight of the story really settles in, because underneath the eerie details, this diary is really about isolation and about what happens to the human mind when it is stripped of everything familiar. Sam wrote about missing sunlight so badly that he once described the memory of it as, quote, "a color I am starting to forget." He wrote about talking to himself just to hear a voice that was not distorted by helium. He wrote, more than once, about wondering if anyone topside would even notice if the line went quiet for good. Not because he wanted that, but because in that kind of extreme isolation, thoughts drift to places they never would on solid ground. Psychologists who study extreme environments, from Antarctic researchers to submarine crews to astronauts, have found the same pattern again and again. Strip away light, strip away human contact, strip away the sky, and the mind starts inventing its own company, its own noise, its own meaning. Sam's diary is one of the rawest examples of that pattern ever put into words by someone who was not writing for science. He was just trying to survive his own head. And here is something that almost nobody outside the diving world knows. Saturation divers are statistically more likely to experience symptoms similar to combat veterans, not because of physical danger alone, but because of the sustained, grinding pressure of controlled fear over weeks at a time. It is not one terrifying moment. It is a slow drip of stress that never fully lets go, day after day, for the length of an entire job. That is the twist most people do not expect when they picture this career. It is not the sharks. It is not even the crushing depth. It is the silence. And what silence does to a person left alone with it for too long. But the diary is not only darkness. That is important to say, because a story like this can tip into something bleak if you only tell one half of it. There are pages where Sam writes about beauty most of us will never witness. Bioluminescent creatures drifting past his helmet light like slow blue sparks. The strange calm of watching a giant structure, a sunken pipeline, or a rig leg disappear into blackness below him, knowing that human hands built something that now belongs entirely to the ocean. He wrote once, and this line has stayed with me, that down there, you stop being the most important thing in the room, because the room does not care about you at all, and somehow that thought gave him peace instead of fear. That single line tells you almost everything about why some men keep choosing this life, even after it nearly breaks them. It is not just a job. It is a kind of confrontation with something bigger than themselves, something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Let's slow down here for a second, because there is a twist buried in this story that changes how you look at the whole thing. Sam's diary was not found by his family after some tragic accident, the way you might expect from a story framed like this. He survived. He retired years later, moved to a small town, and by most accounts lived a quiet, ordinary life. The diary was found by his daughter, cleaning out a storage unit, years after he had already passed away peacefully in his sleep. Old age, nothing dramatic at all. And that is the twist. The most unsettling, haunting, emotionally raw writing you will ever read from the bottom of the ocean was written by a man who made it out fine. He carried all of that weight quietly for the rest of his life. Never talking about it, never explaining it, just living beside it. Which makes you wonder how many other people are walking around right now carrying something just as heavy, just as strange, and just as unspoken. That is really what this story is about underneath all the pressure gauges and helium hiss and dark water. It is not just a story about diving. It is a story about how much of the human experience happens in places we never see, in jobs we never think about, in silence that never makes it into conversation. We tend to imagine bravery as something loud, a rescue, an explosion, a headline. But a lot of real courage looks like a man alone in a metal chamber, 300 feet under the ocean, writing down his fear in pencil, just so it has somewhere to go besides his own head. So here is something worth sitting with after this video ends. What is the version of that dark water in your own life? The place you go, quietly, that nobody else sees, where you face something heavy and just keep breathing until it passes? I would genuinely like to know, so drop a comment and tell me, what is the loneliest place you have ever had to be brave in? And if this story made you feel even a little bit of what Sam must have felt down there, share it with someone, because stories like this do not spread because of algorithms. They spread because someone reads them and thinks of another person who needs to hear it too. Somewhere out there right now, someone else is carrying their own version of that pressure, and they might just need to know they are not the only one. The ocean keeps its secrets well, but every once in a while one of them finds its way back to the surface, written in shaking pencil, by a man who never meant for anyone to read it, and maybe that is the whole point. The deepest truths about who we are rarely come from the moments we plan to share. They come from the ones we think no one will ever see.